Hey everybody, Will and Matt here from Downtime Activities, back with another episode of the Bonus Action Podcast, which is just kind of a free-form discussion of storytelling and tabletop RPG related topics. Just kind of a little bit of everything, going both into games we've run in the past, games we want to run, just the way we've seen things done well or done wrong in the past, and just trying to even just give ourselves some advice, I guess.
Think and discuss through things.
Yeah.
Oftentimes that ends with us discovering information we didn't know we had to use to begin with.
We came up with so many one-shot ideas, at the very least.
Yes.
And today we're going over something that a lot of DMs tend to stray away from. I think probably to their own detriment, which is using cliches in their tabletop games.
But Will, cliche's bad. Cliche's cliche. Can't use cliche in game. Why is that wrong?
Well, I mean, I think there's kind of two ways to approach cliches in general. There's using them sort of as written, I guess, like following the cliche to the letter, and then there's doing all of the setup for the cliche and then turning stuff on its head. And either one is probably going to be equally as effective. Mm-hmm. The reason you can get away with using cliches in tabletop RPGs is because nobody ever does. The idea of rescuing a princess from a tower, just, getting hired by a king to go, slay a dragon, to save the kingdom. Like, everybody has those in mind, whether they've been playing tabletop RPGs for a long time or whether they're just starting to get into them. I mean, the idea of rescuing a princess from a tower, it has been around in storytelling for forever. Hundreds of years, at the very least. Thousands of years, if you want to include, like, Homer's, account of the war at Troy. Mm-hmm. But most game masters just don't actually use cliches. Everybody has the idea that this is a cliche. It kind of becomes a joke, and then game masters just stray away from them. So because that happens, it's actually going to feel kind of refreshing if you put your party on a quest to go save a princess from a tower, or just like do something that's sort of just like very generic sort of fairy tale storytelling. I mean, heck, you could run your party through the entire plot of one of the like classic Disney princess movies. Where like it's the party taking the place of Prince Charming or having to accompany Prince Charming. To do whatever, storming the castle and slaying the dragon. And the party is, really actually going to enjoy that. There are going to be jokes about, like, we're just rescuing a princess from a tower, but it's still going to feel kind of novel and kind of unique.
Mm-hmm. I think that, just like you said, cliches are just kind of a goldmine of inspiration and plot and story to use. And maybe we should scrap this video and not tell people to use it, because then everyone will start using it in their games, and then we can't use it in our games anymore because it'll become cliche again. But the cliche is almost no longer cliche because people avoid using it so much. And I think that you're right that just directly using cliche oftentimes has a kind of refreshing factor to it. At the very least, it's something that will feel familiar, and kind of something that the players know what to expect. And that can open up the door for what you talked about, like the subversion of expectation and twisting and using them in a way that the players don't expect. I.e., in the end, it's the dragon that needs saving from the evil witch princess in the tower. Or I also loved discussing using a cliche, but even making the characters not the protagonists of the cliche story, but the hang-alongs is also a amazing fun time when you have this foolishly brave Prince Charming character that the players are going along with on their quest to save the princess, and they have to deal with this kind of arrogant man baby, valorous to a fault idiot character
who they know will just claim credit for everything that they've done at the end of the
but
adventure.
They owe his dad a favor because the king gave them their fortress at the start of this,
or
whatever.
It's essentially a work release program, because the rogue got caught again, and to keep him from being executed, we need to or it was probably the bard. Let's be honest. The rogue didn't get caught. The bard got caught.
They both did it. The bard got caught.
So we can't have him spend the next rest of the campaign in prison, or so we'll cut a deal with the king to help his just airhead of a son go rescue this princess in a grand quest.
What's good cliches to use? So we've talked saving the princess from the dragon, or getting hired to go slaying the dragon, the princess in the tower. Those are very classic, tropey, cliche kind of things. What are other good ones? What are other examples you can think of?
Well, this actually leads into another discussion that I was about to bring up, which is, like it or not, know it or not, most DMs are using... If you've ever had your players pick out the guy who was going to betray them the first time they met him, a lot of DMs stray away from certain cliches, but unwittingly use others all the time. Especially with, sort of tropes of certain villains and stuff like that. But those are great cliches to rely on. Even if the players see the betrayal coming the whole time, it's either a great
very great.
Man, what you missed before we started this recording was just a lot of me being unable to speak English today.
That's most of both of our lives, I feel like.
Yeah. If the players see a cliche like that coming, like the villain betraying, the king's
right hand
man, mage advisor betraying the kingdom. If they see it coming, it's going to feel very gratifying when it happens, because we knew it, that son of a bitch. And if they don't see it coming, it's going to be this great twist reveal. So that's kind of the thing with cliches in general, is if they see them coming, it's going to be gratifying, and if they don't see them coming, it's going to be a great reveal. So, just basic cliches like that, the sort of king's right-hand man betraying the kingdom, the grand vizier that turns out to be evil, are excellent ones. I am a huge fan of the princess in a tower trope. We've rescued more knights from towers as princesses, which we can get to later.
Because some people like to use cliches and subvert them. But anyway, on this topic.
Then we have been knights rescuing princesses from towers. Slaying the dragon is excellent. Just really anything from a lot of fairy tales, or just kind of a lot of the sort of old Disney movie trope stuff. I think is just excellent fodder for systems. I'm honestly struggling to think of lots of other super specific examples.
I think that it's kind of something that's so wide and generic, it's hard to kind of pin down a bunch. But like you said, anything from any generic fantasy story you can think of, there's lots of tropes and cliches to draw from them. And interestingly enough, because of the pervasiveness of D&D in the market of fantasy and storytelling, D&D has its own cliches and tropes as well that are independent of any other storytelling. What immediately comes to mind is everyone starts in a bar, and a bar fight's what brings everyone together. And so many DMs are like, never start in a bar. Everyone starts in a bar. And that also has kind of come to the point where now, nobody starts in a bar. It never starts with a bar fight. Unless you're certain Wizards of the Coast products or something like that are trying to kind of lean into that tropiness.
Doesn't Dragon Heist
it does.
start in a tavern with
and I think that it's intentional. Or at least they would say it's intentional, because they're like, oh, look at us leaning into the trope. How fun is that? But I think that there's a lot of that kind of D&D tropiness, too, or cliche, that people feel like they can't.
Every chest is a mimic. Every dungeon has a beholder at the end of it.
Exactly. And while it can feel a little generic D&D if you do that for every single part of everything in your adventure, those are tropes, those are cliches for a reason, and that's because they're very fundamental. This is D&D in a lot of ways, and they're totally usable. And you can totally start in a bar, and you can totally start with a bar fight, and that's a great way to bring characters together, or put them at odds in some situations. And you can also kind of follow what I think is going to become the later part of this conversation in subverting those and using them in a different way. For instance, you talked about the beholder at the end of the dungeon. Maybe the characters hear a rumor of some sort of great floating eye monster that is in this dungeon, and when they go there, it's actually, I think it's called an eyewitness. What happens when mind flayers get a hold of a beholder? and they like twist and turn into their own abomination. It's actually like a coven of mind flayers that are down there that have one of those too. And then there's the subversion of the expectation. They're like, oh, we gotta get our magic gear out of here. The anti-magic ray is gonna get us. It's like, no, they're just gonna eat your brains. Be ready for that instead. Should have worn a helmet, idiot. Like, you can kind of take that and subvert it, and that can be a fun moment too, leaning into those D&D cliches.
Well, and even if you're, sticking to those cliches, every chest in a dungeon is a mimic. Make a dungeon where every room has a chest in it. That's a mimic. Or make it or all but one, or or make it a roll a d4 and everything but a 4 means the chest is a mimic. And see how long it takes your players to just stop examining chests and see how much loot they miss out on.
Or you put make them all these like fragile wooden chest mimics, but one of them is full of healing potions, and they like, not this time, and they like explode it with a fireball from distance, and they find the burnt residue of what would have been like a week's worth of healing potions for the party. That's more if you like to torture your players, or that can be a fun way to do it.
Or don't, instead of every chest being a mimic, every chest has an item in it that's a mimic. So then it just turns into like, all right, we've got 6 pieces of loot here. One of them will try and kill us. Which one is it? And then
spellbook has teeth, I'm sure of it.
And then watching and then it's like watching the mind games that the players play on themselves, and then the mind games that the players begin playing on those objects to try and figure out which one is a mimic is just immediately, once, you really only need it to happen once in order to teach the lesson, and then the players will, then it just becomes more interesting each time it happens, because the players are, either just, figure out a really solid way to deal with it every time, and then it's really funny when they do that to just a regular wooden box, or they just become very efficient at finding the mimic item in the chest of goodies.
Their system to determine that. I think it's also something that we do all the time as DMs, that is leaning into a cliche or a D&D trope and using it to mess with our players, that I've done since I've started DMing, I think, which is the, confirming that somebody's doing something, alluding to the fact that it's trapped. You touch it, with your bare hands, and the player's like, and, all of a sudden they backpedal, or they're like, yeah, sure, whatever, I pick it up. And you're like, okay, nothing happens.
So,
moment can build that a moment of suspension, why is he asking? He shouldn't have to ask.
Which just eventually turned into, I touch it with my bare hands. Okay, cool, nothing happens, into the bag of holding.
Yes,
that's
which
just became everything with doors, with cities,
city walls.
You touch
it with your bare hands.
It's like I touched the tavern with my bare hands. Nothing happens. Cool, into the bag of holding. Because that's how D&D players tend to operate. But
even if you don't use the cliche, you can use the expectations that cliches build to mess with your players, have fun, but also to just set up fun moments like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the real creme de la creme of using cliches, though, is subverting expectations with cliches and building up a cliche moment and then having it end in a way that is unexpected. And I think a very good example of this that we talked about earlier was there was a moment where your character was a female character, kind of like nobility, a noble woman. She was very much a warrior, but technically kind of a princess, right? And there was a knight in shining armor character that was a kind of friend of the party who ends up getting locked away in a tower. And your character, along with the party, more or less, your character saves the knight in shining armor from the tower. Mm-hmm. And that was a very fun way of taking that and turning it on its head. That's less of the, you think it's the cliche and you flip it to be something else at the end, and more of just you flip the cliche from the beginning. For instance, there's a dragonling gold dragon that is locked away in a tower with an evil witch, and you have to save this dragonling before the witch can grow it up and corrupt it and try and use it for her own nefarious gains. Or you're hired by a dragon to rescue its wormling from a princess that kidnapped it that has it locked in a tower. And then it's a social encounter because you go there and this princess has put the dragonling in makeup and costumes and is like making it parade around, and it's like this childish princess who's treating it like a stuffed animal. But the dragon couldn't come and take their dragonling back because that's seen as attacking the kingdom, and they don't want a bunch of freaking knights in shining armor coming to their house all the time. So they send you to try and sort out the problem for them.
It's like, I mean, being able to just take tropes and essentially reverse the order of the phrases within that trope
Yes.
will get you a lot of mileage in that regards, because it's immediately sort of recognizable as like, oh, it's very funny that what we're doing is rescuing a dragon from a princess, but it still is it's still unique, and it still forces sort of unique responses and unique RP challenges, as well as potentially combat and challenges for the party.
And you can still lean into a lot of those same like picturesque elements of the cliche itself. For instance, with the rescuing the dragon from the princess, it can still be in this distant castle on a mountaintop, and it can still be that they are locked away in the highest room of the tallest tower when you arrive there, and all of those kind of classic like foundational blocks of the trope can still be there, just with those roles flipped, or just with that one kind of key core element on its head. You have a lot of freedom there. How then, talking about subversion, what's a good example of some, like, not just taking these and flipping it from the beginning, but having it be, oh, I'm rescuing the princess from the tower until I get to the tower?
Well, it's something we brought up in a previous, I believe it was the one-shot campaign episode of, like, you know, what if the party, you know, the example there for one-shot was everybody makes the knight, all these knights competing to rescue the princess from the tower. They get there and it's actually a hag, you know. So then all of a sudden it becomes this, like, it's this constant race for everybody to try and get in through the door first. But once they're in through the door, then everyone's trying to push somebody else out in front. It's just this like immediate reversal, not to some degrees of expectations, but just like of the whole point of the quest. And that's one of those things where it's like it is going to look like the trope the whole way along, just like until it doesn't right away. It's not the reversal, it's a rug pull, I guess, if that makes sense. Yeah. And really, that's all you truly need to do is change the ending. I think the best example of this in Dungeons and Dragons is, or similar fantasy RPGs, is the party going to fight a dragon. It turns out the dragon had every right to do whatever it was he was doing, and the dragon's not actually the villain here.
Which is almost a new cliche in and of itself.
Yes.
But, yes.
Because a lot of people, like myself, realized that dragons are cool, so let's not just kill every single one we run into. They make for great boss fights, but they're also just cool. So.
And can be very interesting and wise NPCs. Another fun idea I just had thinking here of a subversion or like a twist, a rug pull at the end of the story, with the classic Princess in the Tower story, is what if it's kind of haggish ending as well, but it's actually just like a necromantic witch who is in this tower, who's weaponized the cliche, and she has made it knowledge through the land that there's this gorgeous princess locked in the tower, but that way individual knights show up one at a time for her to kill and turn into powerful zombie warriors, and she slowly built an army of zombie knights in shining armor, and when the party arrives, all of a sudden she has to actually bring them to bear, and then the party is fighting 10 years worth of knights in shining armor as zombies that this witch has used to build her necromantic army.
Or, in going with sort of the same trope there, what if you finally break into the tower, but instead of the princess having been, locked in this sleep for, 100 years that preserved her beauty, what if she's actually just 100 years old? Like, she's just been stuck there waiting for somebody to rescue her for, it's just this for however many years, and like everyone's, she's just
this like lovable granny character, but maybe she does fall in love with one of the characters, and the characters have to like try and nicely be like, I'm not here to marry you, I'm just here to rescue, and like, it's my hero.
But then it's like, it's a very sort of funny and sort of still heartfelt way to like rescue the princess, because like you get there to rescue the princess and it's just this really old nice lady who's been waiting here for 60 years for somebody to come rescue her. as opposed to the young, beauty of all the land that she was when she was locked away. Because, again, the characters are still probably going to be really defensive of that and protective of that NPC.
Oh, yeah. More so, probably.
But then it's a fun way to play with that expectation. And, fantasy isn't the only thing that has, a lot of the kind of tropes like this, or has setups for tropes like this. Science fiction, the classic one is like the derelict freighter, right? With the xenomorph infestation. There are, I think there could be really fun ways to, really subvert those expectations and sort of, turn some of that on its head, probably in really goofy ways. And it
could be in a sci-fi or non-sci-fi RPG setting that you
absolutely.
Do something like that. It could be the ship adrift at sea that your vessel comes upon.
It's
abandoned mansion.
Everyone is going to immediately... Haunted mansions are actually an excellent trope that I think we should probably talk about here in a moment. Yeah, the sort of derelict freighter, the sort of ghost drifter, as it were, is really going to everyone is going to have a certain expectation when you encounter a ship like that. I used it in a previous campaign just to give over a really, really cool piece of loot, being the ship itself. But especially in a sci-fi campaign, you find the abandoned space station, you find this big abandoned dreadnought or freighter. Everyone's going to have certain expectations going into it of it's an alien.
Step lightly. If there's any movement, shoot.
You hear something in the vents, just start shooting into the vents. This was not a power failure. I guarantee you, this was aliens. So then, playing with that expectation, and specifically playing with that expectation in really sort of offbeat or goofy ways, if everyone's going into it expecting sort of this horror experience, but instead they get not necessarily a slapstick comedy experience, but at least something kind of goofy and offbeat, that's really going to make that trope land in a very fun and just totally unexpected way. And that's sort of the glory with tropes is they are very easy ways to set up expectations and then subvert them. And they're also just really easy ways to just give sort of gratifying experiences. Because if the players do end up just clearing a derelict freighter or derelict space station of xenomorphs, that's still going to be a fun quest. And it's I knew right away what it was going to be, and all this stuff happened. They're still going to feel gratified. You don't necessarily need that sort of reversal or that rug pull in order to have that payoff.
And if you do it and you follow the expectation with that one, you have to have a moment where things are skittering in the walls all around them so that one player can quote and be like, they're in the walls! They're in the goddamn walls! And be freaking out while that
Game over,
happening.
Man.
Game over. Those moments can be very fun and gratifying, just like you said, even if you just follow the expected story beat. We talked Haunted Mansion. That's another great cliche story to use. And there's kind of normal and subverting versions of that exist as cliches to begin with, whether it's the haunted mansion with evil demon monstrous spirits inside of it that you have to purify out of the house, or if it's the haunted house with overall benign spirits that you need to find a way to let peacefully move on to the afterlife,
or even the haunted house with relatively lovable spirits that are characters themselves has been done quite a bit. Even just looking at Harry Potter with a lot of the ghosts that drift through Hogwarts, it gives that sort of same impression of that sort of mysterious haunted house feel, but the ghosts themselves are kind of just lovable characters by and large.
And they can open up the opportunity for interesting roleplay, and also I think, especially if it's kind of whether it's an evil spirit or a good spirit, if you have this interesting structure that's haunted. This may be kind of branching into a different topic here, but kind of having that classic story of we have to find the thing that's keeping the spirit here and then let it leave. And then what's left behind is a super neat structure, and then the players have their home base. That's another very kind of classic thing you can do that's very fun and effective. Talking haunted mansions makes me think of another cliche that's fun to talk about. Murder mansions, murder mysteries. Key to this is the butler did it. No matter what, make sure the butler is always to blame. But an interesting story, combine these. The butler did it because he was possessed by an evil spirit. And so when they're like, we knew it was the butler, and then you put him in binds, and then someone else gets murdered because a different person gets taken over by the spirit. Now you've subverted that expectation. I think there's lots of that you could do with a murder.
No, absolutely. Well, and players like feeling clever, and there's definitely a balance to be struck with mysteries in general. Like, if you can strike that balance right, it will feel like the players have solved a very difficult thing, and that makes them feel very clever. Every once in a while, murder mysteries just go completely unsolved. I don't even... You explained at one point what it was that pulled off that mystery, but I mean, I remember there were tracks that vanished. We thought it might have been a bullywog or something. I really don't remember much about that murder mystery apart from the fact that we never solved it.
It was a very hard to solve murder mystery. Probably too much so. One where I didn't give enough thought as a young DM on, like, they will want to solve this. It can't just be an unsolvable killing. But anyway.
Right. But, like, and to some degrees, players expect to run into murder mysteries. Not every campaign has them, but players are immediately going to recognize them when they appear. The stabbing at the dinner party or anything like that. And then, they're going to immediately sort of default into either certain expectations or just, like, certain ways of, like, how they want to handle it. And they're excellent places for either to just, like, make interesting little mini stories out of the murder mysteries or to, just play around with, again, the same old tropes. It's, like, if the players solve multiple murder mysteries over the course of the game, I probably wouldn't make the butler the first one.
No.
But, like, having one of them where the butler did it is going to be a fun nod.
Of course it was the butler. We should have assumed that from the beginning, but we didn't think you'd be so cliche and use that. I think that's another good example, a fun way to do that.
Well, and there's a very good chance, too, that if you know the butler did it and you make the butler suitably suspicious, the players will just ignore the butler because, he's too suspicious, and it can't have been the butler because that's a cliche.
Just have the butler be, like, sitting in the corner maniacally twiddling his fingers, and they'll be like, with bloody gloves, and they'll be like, yeah, no, sure, the butler did it, haha. All right, let's look way too close at this tiny clue that means nothing, that's just a red herring instead. And beat our head against this for 30 minutes.
And that's part of the point of using cliches, is that players expect something from them. So by and large, because they expect they know how something goes, they expect they know how something ends, they're going to just, like, skate right past that, especially if it is the right answer, and then just spend way too much time digging around in the weeds.
Instead of just siding with the cliche.
Exactly.
Because sometimes you can just use the cliche as is. We've talked a lot cliche as a DM. Let's talk cliches as a player, specifically in character creation and making characters that follow cliches or subvert them. I think starting with, like, following, it's okay to make a knight in shining armor character.
Absolutely.
And you can do it very well and very interesting.
And it's totally okay to do the exact opposite of that and make a princess in shining armor. I'll rescue myself from this damn tower.
Exactly.
Thank you very much. And if you're, it's sort of leaning back as a DM here, if your players make a character like that, give them the opportunity to sort of fulfill that character, in that sort of cliche sense. Lock the princess in shining armor in a tower and let her rescue herself, or let the knight in shining armor, go on heroic quests. Character cliches are another one of those places where I think, like, the Dungeons & Dragons in particular has just really built up its own
100%.
Big list of cliches. It's it's the
Elven Ranger.
It's the Elven Ranger or the half Elven Ranger. It's the curiosity killed the cat halfling. It's which is a very fun character to play. It's also a great way to lose a character.
Sometimes session one.
The rogue with the really edgy backstory, the warlock with the even edgier backstory,
and they're just constantly having this, like, edgy backstory dick measuring contest between the two of them. Like, oh yeah, your parents both died when you were young. Well, mine were taken to hell by my patron when I was young. Yeah, well, mine were killed by one-eyed demon monsters that is way scarier than your patron is. Edgy backstory would be great.
And I'm guilty of that as well, making Because, because quite often characters with grim backstories are interesting characters.
Mm-hmm.
It's also very easy to take that too far. And it's also very easy for it to just stray into trope territory or cliche territory, which is exactly what I think has happened a lot.
Yes.
But making those characters isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
Making sort of cliched characters isn't necessarily a bad thing.
I think that it can make for very, very fun moments. It gives you, especially if you're somebody who is either newer to games or maybe you have a hard time role-playing, it can also give you some very foundational blocks in how to role-play your character. Of like, if I'm making the knight in shining armor, I know I need to be heroic, I need to be brave, I need to be the first one in the door, I need to be kind to people. Like, I'm trying to be an example of what a good person should be, so that's how I role-play my character. And that can be very good foundational blocks. And it also makes, for you as a player, it gives you lots of opportunity to occasionally subvert those expectations and as a player have those subversion moments where all of a sudden it turns out like, your knight in shining armor has a moment where he breaks and he does something dark, and then it's like this like very big moment because like, oh, he's been the goody two shoes knight in shining armor this whole time, and now look what he did.
Or even worse, he does something cowardly.
Yeah, exactly.
But like, this is baked into the system at its core. Like, so many of the archetypes and the subclasses in especially something like D&D, but the Star Wars tabletop RPG system is also an excellent example of this. The subclasses all fit certain cliches and archetypes. Mm-hmm. The rogue has assassin, it has thief, it has swashbuckler, it has mastermind. Mm-hmm. Like Ranger has the sort of the Beastmaster and the more like Aragorn style, like Hunter Ranger. Like, the Star Wars systems, the smuggler has the much more pilot-based smuggler or the much more sort of gunslinger smuggler. Like, these are built into these systems. These are subclasses for a reason because they're evocative of existing characters and existing styles of play. Like, to some degrees, it is quite interesting to make characters that are free from all cliches and tropes, to make a thief character that is sort of as far removed from your traditional idea of a thief, especially like a fantasy thief, as possible. Like, those are interesting characters, but these are tropes and cliches for a reason. Mm-hmm. And it's not a bad idea to lean into those characters, especially if you don't ever play like character classes or character archetypes sort of straight down the line of what that archetype is supposed to be. Try it. It's like it's very interesting to, especially when those players who don't usually make that type of character do make that type of character. It's immediately just like refreshing to some degrees, but like it is something that even subconsciously the rest of the players at the table will take notice of. Yeah,
definitely. I think that refreshing is a very good word there too. I talked about like kind of using cliches as a building blocks for RP as a newer player, but as an older player, if you've been playing D&D for years and years and you're like, man, my last character was this like 5 combination multi-class like absolute weirdo combination of stuff that I made that is so far from any trope and was so uniquely weird in its own thing, and then like the next campaign you're like, I'm gonna play a straight down the line fighter who is like heavy armor, sword and board, and I'm going to play the hero. I'm going to play the heroic knight in shining armor character who tries to do the right thing. If that's not your style of character, that's fine, but it can also be like, that can be very fun and a very refreshing. It'll feel very new even though it is so cliched, because if you're super used to like, I have to do the wacky thing. We always joke about how like all the characters we end up making.
Campaign 1, it's the Fellowship of the Ring. Mm-hmm. Campaign 3, that the meme we always quote is the like, this guy's a dinosaur and this guy's covered in bees.
I am bees.
This guy's bees.
Like that's kind of what it ends up devolving into, because you're constantly seeking this like new experience, this new take, and you're like, well, I either never have, or it's been a long time since I have played a very classic tropey sort of character. And like you said, they're tropes for a reason. It's a lot of fun to play those kinds of characters.
Well, and pretty much, my 2 favorite classes, at least in 5th edition D&D, are Barbarian and Rogue. Mm-hmm. They're very much opposite ends of the spectrum. I'm either a werewolf or a goblin. It's
IRL.
I have two sides.
Nicest guy you'll know and twisted fucking psychopath. Oh god.
Like the more I play sort of either niche builds or multi-class heavy characters or a wizard who is just a cat. Great character, a lot of fun. Mostly because of NPC reactions to that character. The more I'm like, part of me wants to just stat a rogue down the line again. Part of me wants to just stat a barbarian down the line again, and just like, it's not this necessarily this like getting back to simpler times, but it's just that like, rewatching, the original Conan the Barbarian or we're playing a stealth-based video game. It's just like, man, I just want to play a barbarian again. I just want to play a rogue again. Like, those, like, tropes and cliches have staying power. That's why they've become what they are, because they work.
Mm-hmm.
So they can absolutely be overused, but there's no reason really to shy away from them. Especially in something like this, which is really informal and is a game. Like,
the point is to have fun and tell stories.
Like, you're sitting down and playing with friends. Like, there's no point to like go for an Oscar nomination.
You don't need to have this elitism about your like fantasy story you're making up with your pals on the weekends.
Like there's no Academy Awards of tabletop RPGs. You're not going to get a best screenplay award for like how
I think
unique
best supporting
and
actor
your
goes to
characters are.
Spanky. In Devils of the West.
And Scoos in Star Wars.
Yes.
Just an immaculate performance.
My
all-time favorite Scoos line has not yet come out, and it actually will it come out before this episode? The beginning of episode 5, Scoos is like, it's like the first line of episode 5 is my all-time favorite Scoos line. We recorded it a bunch last night. Like, that's, like, as they're saying, like, you don't really need to, like, there's a certain level of seriousness that should be involved in some of these games, like, especially, like, the game master appreciates it when players kind of take the game seriously.
At least take the story seriously.
Right, but it's a game.
Mm-hmm.
There's no reason to, like, outlaw certain cliches or tropes.
And there's no reason that a cliche can't be a serious part of a story.
Absolutely.
Right? There's a reason it's a cliche, and that's because it's been a part of countless serious stories and big parts of it, likely.
There's a reason that it was your mentor who betrays you at the end of that, the original big campaign that I ran. Like, because I know that's the villain reveal that's going to like have any impact at all. Mm-hmm. It doesn't necessarily work all that well if you get to the end of the Scooby-Doo episode, unmask the villain, and everyone goes, "Who the fuck is this guy?
Who's this guy?" Let's see who you really are. Who the fuck's this guy? Like, I would have gotten away with it too if it weren't for whoever you all are.
You want the mask to come off and the whole party to go, "Old man Jenkins."
Like that's what you're looking for at that moment.
That's in itself a cliche, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that sort of reveal or that sort of twist. But it's there for a reason, and it absolutely serves a purpose within the story.
100%. One more bit of talking point for character creation using cliches, and that's the other side of this cliche coin, which is the subversion of expectation in a cliche. What immediately comes to my mind is a conversation we've had a couple times recently of the knight in shining armor, but it's just actually like a half ogre who has his helmet down. They're like, "Oh, great Sir Knight, lift your helm, let me see the face of my hero. Who are you?" And he just like takes it off, like, "Sir Stink." And it's like this big dumb half ogre who is the knight in shining armor. I think that kind of, what's other good examples of like the character that seems like a trope, or seems like a cliche, but
it's really fun to make a rogue who wears an eye patch and dresses all in black and keeps hinting at this just insane, dark, twisted backstory. And he's always something will happen, he'll stare off haunted distance, only to have his parents show up.
He's loving and healthy.
He's got both eyes just fine, and he just ran away from home to become an adventurer, and was
this is how you be an adventurer. You put on an eye patch and you pretend like you have an edgy backstory.
It's like that. And that is a payoff that is going to land so well for the rest of the party. 100%. When that reveal happens, that's an unforgettable moment. And it's really fun for that player to kind of share knowing looks with the DM, or to always be texting back and forth with the DM about sort of things. Sort of things related to that backstory. It's an excellent way to just set up you're setting up the expectations. You look like one type of character, and then you get to just flip it around completely. Make a sorcerer who keeps writing stuff down in his spell book.
Yeah.
And convincing everybody he's a powerful wizard.
Man, you don't have a whole lot of variety in the spells you cast for a wizard. I'm specialized.
And then it's revealed he's actually just a sorcerer. He's just been pretending all this time.
And that can be an amazing moment when the party gets captured and they're like, take the wizard's spell book so he can't have any access to his spells, and then he just still casts fireball through the bars of the jail cell and blows up the guard. Or mage hand or whatever to get the keys, and it's how do you do it? Or they take away the spell focus or whatever, and it's how are you doing this? Oh, forgot dragon blood. I just like to write my stuff down.
I'm not actually a wizard.
I'm sorry, guys.
I'm a sorcerer. Or the artificer that got added in D&D, especially the armorer with the infiltrator armorer, where it's you can wear it under other clothes or stuff like that. I always kind of wanted to make a melee-based armorer artificer who wears hooded robes over the armor and uses the I believe it's called the Veteran's Cane, which is a common item that you can turn bonus action turn into a longsword.
Yeah.
But it would it's a magic item, so if somebody was using detect magic, they'd be the wizard's magic staff, and you're throwing lightning at people and doing a couple other spells and just convincing everyone you're a wizard until somebody hits you with a sword and it just skips off of your 18 AC.
Yeah, they're 17 to hit, and you're misses.
And then it turns out you're not a wizard, you're a super dangerous melee combatant. I love what I often refer to as shenanigans characters. I should probably stray away from shenanigans characters a little more often, just play regular characters. But that's exactly what we're talking about here, is setting up a character and, to all accounts and appearances, being one thing entirely for that reveal of being something completely different.
And going off that armor one, another way you can kind of combine two sort of aspects of tropes we've talked about here. Make that armor character who is the knight in shining armor, but when he takes the armor off, he's we've talked about the character who is in a wheelchair when he's not in his magical armor that allows him to walk, and he's this frail, kind of very bookish, intelligent character, but when he puts his armor on, all of a sudden he's smashing people, he's charging headlong into battle, and he's this knight in shining armor who's actually he's somehow Wolverine, but also Professor X. He's somehow both of those characters. He's this ferocious frontline combatant, but he's also the brains of the operation who he comes out of the suit and physically he's not capable anymore. And that can be a very fun this brave knight who's actually the brains.
And there's really just a lot of other there's really just a lot of options there. Class for class in the player's handbook, there's just options for every class, because every class has sort of just certain expectations. You can really play around with the sort of classic barbarian tropes.
Oh yeah.
A lot, especially if he ends up being the highest int character in the party. It can read a dozen languages. Monk or ranger, or just paladin or cleric are excellent ones to just really set up characters' appearances in certain ways, and then just have that rug pull at some point.
I think that a lot of this comes down to, as a player, being willing to play non-class optimally sometimes in the way you stat your character out is a very easy way to do this. Having the high intelligence barbarian, where barbarians are not built for this, but all of a sudden your barbarian's like, yeah, my barbarian, he can tank, he can be up on the front line, but also he's got a +5 in Arcana at first level. Like he's got this like it's this character is like the bookish barbarian, or you have the like sort of very charismatic character in a non-charismatic typically sort of role. You have the kind of face of the party be someone who's usually not, like you have your artificer maybe, who's usually the bookish creative of the party, but you have them be very good at talking to people and have them kind of be this smooth talk. Like you can use your mental stats, and just by speccing into one of those more than typically someone would, make something very interesting, or make a buff wizard.
Absolutely.
Wizards have the benefit of like, you kind of only really need intelligence to be a good wizard. You could totally be a buff wizard, and that's fine. And you don't have to use it all the time. But if you do, like just like this,
especially if you're still an old man with the long white beard,
exactly. And then just like you flex and rip out your robes and like pick up a guy, twirl him in the air, and throw him off the mountain. Like people be like, what the fuck just happened? That was the old man wizard who just did that, and that can be an amazing subversion.
Especially if you're
just play buff Gandalf.
Especially
like,
if you do it early on, leaning into the fact that it's like, oh, I'm just a frail old man. And then just
it's not like call an ambulance, but not for me, pal.
Exactly.
Moment that can come back and have a very fun reveal. I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and it just goes back to the age-old conversation of don't be afraid to play non-optimally. Because you can make a very interesting and fun character and still be effective.
And looking at like the Star Wars RPG system, don't play an intimidating bounty hunter.
Yeah.
Play a very good bounty hunter, but be this really sort of meek, bookish, like, kind of mousy person who's just like, or play a species in that system that you're like, that's
Jawa.
He's exactly a Jawa bounty hunter. It's like you just have lots of options in any system. Play the smuggler that's not, the sort of smooth-talking, charismatic, shoot a man under a table type. Mm-hmm. Like, making a very honorable, sort of stuttering smuggler would be a very interesting character within the, sort of the Star Wars universe at large. And that's a character that's, like, still going to be good at some things.
Make a bubbly, outgoing assassin.
Yes, absolutely.
Make the what's-his-face from...
Populous Michael.
Yeah, oh boy, here I go killing again. Like,
I just love killing.
That can be an amazing character to make.
It's like, the cliches exist for a reason, and it is either really in the following of them or the subversion of them that the best characters are made, I think. Like, trying to stay away from cliches just across the board tends to make just either really odd characters or really muddied characters.
Yeah.
So, like, just lean into some of those tropes. It really is fun.
It is.
That's just, like, kind of the point of it at the end of the day.
It's actually, like, a good time to do. And both in your story creating and in your character creating, tropes and cliches are a powerful tool to use, whether you're subverting them or not. They're something that should be in the arsenal of the RPG enthusiast, and not something that you shy away from. Now, there is a too far to take this, definitely. If everything's a cliche, then it gets boring.
You don't want your entire Star Wars campaign to just be the original trilogy.
Yeah.
You don't want your entire D&D campaign to just follow the 3 Lord of the Rings films, or just follow the plot of Skyrim.
Yeah.
There's elements that you can take. There are, sort of characters and story moments, or even entire quests, but you can't just copy one for one there.
Mm-hmm. And I think that there shouldn't be an elitism. There shouldn't be an elitism and a like pride to not use these kind of things because they're so cliche and so below my powerful storytelling pedigree. But like, if you think really about it, especially in RPGs, I know I'm the biggest user of this, abuser one might even say, and that is that all ideas are just a conglomeration of what you've taken in, all the media, all the books you've read, all the movies you've seen, all the other games you've played, and using the things that are so good and so beloved and so like picture perfect for a story, that they've become a cliche over the last 1,000 years. Those have become so for a reason, and you shouldn't be too proud to use them. Mm-hmm. They are... Every tool in your storytelling arsenal is worth weaponizing and using to make a fun and interesting story.
Absolutely. And, and this really, I think cliches are an excellent point to, this is something we talked about before, which is like, no good joke at the table should go like sort of unpunished. Mm-hmm. Like when players make jokes about something like, is this just going to be this, or is this just going to be this? Like, sometimes it's not a bad idea to just lean into that, to just let the players talking out loud at the table sort of guide where stories go. Mm-hmm. Every once in a while, they'll come up with better ideas than you had.
And those are now your idea that you had all along. Good job, DM. Well played.
I tend to just call out when I'm just like, oh, that is so much better than what I wrote. Like, oh man, that's a great idea.
Where were you 3 months ago when I was planning this campaign?
But it just gives you a little bit of fuel in that regards, and like players, especially anybody who's been playing a tabletop RPG for a while, sort of knows or sort of has expectations, whether those expectations are built on tropes and cliches or not. So,
at the end of the day, as a DM, GM, whatever, use cliches, sometimes with subversion, sometimes straight up. Don't be too proud to use them. And if your players make a character that is leaning into or having a fun subversion of a cliche, use that in the story you're telling too, and give them their moment as a knight in shining armor to save a princess in a tower, or as a knight, what seemingly is a knight in shining armor, but actually is Stink, the half-ogre barbarian in full plate, who's, like, inside of this. Then have that moment where the, like, beautiful princess wants to see their face, and they get to go, like, hee, and, like, pull their helm and go, I'm Stink. Like, that moment gets to happen, and that's hilarious. Like, that, lean into that and give them that moment. As a player, don't feel like unique is always good, and that unique is always interesting. Cliches can be powerful, fun tools to build your character.
And really, what makes characters unique isn't your backstory or your stat line. It's how you RP your character. It's the responses you have to situations. Mm-hmm. It's how you choose to act.
It's your decisions in play.
You can make a knight in shining armor and still be a perfectly unique character.
100%.
Even being, statted out as a human fighter down the line.
Champion fighter down the line, humanly. You could be... I think that it also, like, a last little note here, people oftentimes rely on being mechanically interesting to be interesting characters. And if your character is not mechanically interesting, then even more you have to lean on your roleplay and your decision-making to make your character interesting.
What makes your character interesting isn't your character sheet.
No, it really isn't. And at the end of the day, it's the character you make and the stories that you tell with them. And that as the character you make, not the stats you make. So use cliches, make an interesting character. If you've done this before, what's your favorite subversion of expectation? If you're watching this on YouTube, which I assume anyone who's seeing this or hearing this is on YouTube, in the comments, I want to see the best subversion of expectation moment you've had in your game you've run where you've seen your DM use, where you thought it was for sure the princess in the tower, but actually it was something far, far more grim.
Or just, the best stories of people using cliches and, and it paying off and actually working out.
Working out well. I think that's where we're going to stop this one. Good conversation. Use cliches. Subvert cliches. Have fun with them. Hope you enjoyed this. Hope you found it enlightening. Probably not, but maybe. You never know. You might have low standards. Thanks for listening / watching, and we'll see you in the next one.
Are you already recording?
Yep.
Good.
I wish I was recording. Beep, beep, beep. Wish I was recording you speaking Sim earlier, but unfortunately we didn't catch that, Jim.
My brain does not work very well most of the time. And like yesterday, today, it's felt slightly worse than usual. So that's what I'm going to blame it on. Is me speaking. That's what I'm going to blame me speaking Simlish on.
Is that what it's called, Simlish?
I think so.
Is it Simlish?
You know, you've probably heard this. Katy Perry did a song in Simlish for like Sims 4.
No. Real?
Yeah. Yeah. It's that's not like I'm in no way pulling your leg here. That is 100%
For some reason,
a true.
whenever I think
thing.
of Sim speak, I think of the classic Vine where it's at some like Mexican restaurant's sign, but like the letters are slightly separated across from each other. So instead of saying fresh avocado, it says free shavakadu.
Yeah.
And that just, for me, that's what Simish is free shavakadu. And so now I'm picturing Katy Perry singing free shavakadu.
The thing is, though, like, because I've never heard the whole song, but I've seen clips of like her recording it or like or stuff from trailers, and it's like, this sounds like a Katy Perry song. But it's in Simlish. So it is.
How do you write a song in Simlish?
I have no idea. But it's like, it's one of those things where it's like watching it is like you feel your brain beginning to like kind of lock up, because it's like it's one of those things where
it but doesn't understand
things almost make sense, and that's sometimes worse than them not making sense.
Exactly. If it makes no sense, it's like, oh, this isn't a real thing, clearly. But when like there's just like, this is so close to being a real thing, but this is wrong, my brain can't deal with that.
It's kind of adjacent to the uncanny valley, I guess.
Yeah.
It's
just like, close enough to being a real song that I'm scared of it.
I mean, not necessarily that, but I think there is a thing where it's like, if something is like, yeah, that almost makes sense, it's kind of triggering that almost same response as like the uncanny valley, where it's like, look, if this didn't actually truly look like a person, it'd be fine. And if it looked like a person, it'd be fine. But there's that uncanny valley where things are just wrong.
Drop. There's a deep little crevasse.
And I think, I don't know, things making sense is sort of the same way. I think that's why sometimes players, honestly, to bring it back around to tabletop RPGs, I think that's part of the reason players get so frustrated with some puzzles, because there can be moments in some puzzles where you're like, I know there's a solution here. I know we're right on the verge of getting it. I know it's right in front of me. But, like, it's like, I feel like I'm almost there. It almost makes sense. And now I'm just mad because I can't, like...
the last step is the most frustrating one, for sure, with puzzles a lot of the time.
Sometimes sometimes you reach the middle of the room before you figure out how a trap works, and you have to...
Well, we knew how the trap worked until we got to the middle of the room and realized we did not know how the trap worked. Or that moment when you decide that you best start believing in Sudokus because you're in one.
That was an official Wizards of the Coast puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
Strangely enough.
And one that was, like, we correctly solved without correctly solving.
Yeah.
Like, the Sudoku could be solved multiple ways with how they laid it. Anyway, yeah. Let's talk cliches.